What if the true Catelyn Stark, the one George R.R. Martin wrote, the woman of iron will, burning love, and unforgiving vengeance, had made it to our screens? Not just a grieving mother, not just a noble lady of Winterfell, but a woman whose story is carved into the very foundations of Westeros. She was not simply Ned Stark's wife. She was a Tully of Riverrun, raised to rule, bred to endure. She was the mother of kings and the harbinger of wrath. Her love was a shield, her grief a weapon, and even death could not silence her. This is the story of Catelyn Stark as she was meant to be, the woman who fought, who defied, who returned from the grave for vengeance. And it begins not in Winterfell, but in the halls of Riverrun, where a young girl was taught that duty comes before all things, even the heart. Catelyn Tully was born in Riverrun, the ancestral seat of House Tully, nestled between the Red Fork of the Trident and the Tumblestone River. From the moment she could walk, she understood one thing. She was a Tully, and that meant duty above all else. Her father, Lord Hosta Tully, was a man of ambition and pragmatism. He had spent his life strengthening House Tully's position through alliances and saw his daughters as key pieces in the grand game of marriage and power.
A good marriage is the foundation of a strong house, Catelyn. Your duty is to bind Riverrun to the great lords of Westeros. Love is a luxury, not a necessity.
He was not unkind, but his affection came in the form of expectations rather than warmth. Catelyn grew up knowing she would never have the freedom to choose her own path, but she accepted it with grace because that was what was expected of her. Her mother, Minisa Went, was gentle and soft-spoken, but Catelyn barely remembered her. Minisa died giving birth to a stillborn son when Catelyn was young, leaving a quiet sorrow over Riverrun.
Your mother had a kind heart. She would have wanted you to find joy in duty, not just bear it.
But duty was all Catelyn knew. Edmure, the only son and heir, was years younger than Catelyn, and far from the composed, commanding leader their father hoped for. He was impulsive, eager for approval, and often frustrated by the weight of responsibility he did not yet understand.
When I am Lord, I shall be a warrior like Aegon the Conqueror,
a young Edmure once declared, swinging a wooden sword. Catelyn smiled and tousled his auburn hair.
Then first, you must learn patience, little brother.
She loved him, but even as a child, she understood that it would often fall on her to protect him, to advise him, and to temper his recklessness. Catelyn and Lysa were close as children, whispering secrets beneath the weird wood in the Godswood or giggling about knights who visited Riverrun. But where Catelyn was pragmatic and poised, Lysa was emotional and desperate for affection. And the one who fueled her dreams the most was Petyr Baelish. Petyr came to Riverrun as a ward, the son of a minor noble from the Vale who had once fostered with Hoster Tully. He was a boy of quick wit, sharp tongue, and grand ambition. But he was small, insignificant compared to the great lords around him.
One day I'll be a great lord, Catelyn. Not through birth, but through my mind. I'll rise so high, no one will ever look down on me again.
She smiled politely, thinking it mere child's fancy. But Petyr's affections for her were no childhood dream. They were obsession. He followed her everywhere, always trying to prove himself, challenging boys much larger than him to duels just to impress her. Once, he even challenged Brandon Stark, the man she was betrothed to. Brandon was a wolf, wild and reckless. He laughed as he disarmed Petyr in mere moments, slashing him across the ribs and leaving him bleeding in the yard.
You are no warrior.
Catelyn rushed to Petyr's side, pressing a cloth to his wound. He looked up at her, pain in his eyes, but more than that, rage, humiliation, and something darker, something resentful.
You shouldn't have done that.
I would die for you. I would do anything for you.
She pulled her hand away, unsettled. She pitied him, but she did not love him. She never had. Lysa, however, did. Lysa adored Peter. She saw in him not a weak boy, but a clever man who understood her longing for affection. She gave him her heart, and more. Catelyn did not understand what had happened between them until much later, when Lysa was sent away in shame. Their father never spoke of it, but she heard the whispers. Lysa had been pregnant, and her father had forced her to drink moon tea to end it. Lysa was never the same after that. When she returned to Riverrun, she was more fragile, her smiles more brittle, her love for their father laced with resentment.
You were always his perfect daughter. You got to keep your honor, your pride. I had nothing but shame.
It was the first time Catelyn realized that, despite their sisterhood, there were wounds between them that would never truly heal. By the time Catelyn reached womanhood, her path was already set. She was the daughter of a great house, meant for duty, not love. She would marry Brandon Stark, tie House Stark to House Tully, and fulfill her father's ambitions. She did not dream of adventure, nor of courtly love. She knew what her role was, and she accepted it. But fate is cruel. Brandon Stark would never be her husband. The life she had prepared for would never be hers. And the boy who once bled for her would never forget what he had lost. Catelyn Stark's story is deeper and more tragic than what we saw in the show. And trust me, it only gets darker from here. If this video gets 100 likes, we'll make a part 2. So if you want to see the full, uncut story of the real Catelyn Stark, hit that like button now. Catelyn met Brandon Stark for the first time when she was barely old enough to be called a woman. She had come to Riverrun at her father's invitation, a young lord in his prime, tall, strong, with fierce gray eyes of the north and a restless spirit of a wild wolf. Brandon was everything she had expected from a Stark, and more. He was not the cold, reserved type she had imagined from the stories of Winterfell. He was bold, with a smile that came easily, his confidence bordering on arrogance.
You are a beauty. It is no wonder my father arranged this match. He wanted the most beautiful woman in the Riverlands for his heir.
He had told her the first night they dined together, his voice laced with playful mischief. Catelyn, ever composed, smiled politely.
And your father wanted the Riverlands for the north.
Brandon laughed.
That too, I suppose.
But, duty aside, there was a fire in him that she admired. He had a presence, a way of commanding attention without effort. He was like the river that flowed past her home. Powerful, relentless, untamed. As their betrothal months passed, Catelyn grew to love him. Perhaps it was not the kind of love sung in songs. Not yet. But it was a steady affection, one she could see turning into something real. Brandon made her feel desired, admired, and she imagined the life they would have together in Winterfell. She pictured herself as the Lady of the North, with strong sons who would have their father's fire and her father's wisdom. It was a good match. She was content with her future. Until it was stolen from her. News came suddenly. Lyanna Stark was gone. Rhaegar Targaryen, the Prince of Dragonstone, had taken her during the tourney at Harrenhal. Some whispered it was a kidnapping, others a romantic escape. But to Brandon, there was no question. The day he learned the news, he was more furious than she had ever seen him.
I will cut that dragon's throat myself. I will ride to King's Landing and demand her back.
She tried to reason, but there was no calming a storm once it had begun. Brandon was not a man of patience, nor one to wait for diplomacy. He rode south with fire in his heart and steel in his hand, accompanied by his closest men. Catelyn never saw him again. Brandon reached King's Landing demanding his sister's return, his fury barely contained. He called for Rhaegar to face him, to fight him like a man. But Rhaegar was not there. The Mad King Aerys was. And Aerys did not tolerate threats. Brandon and his men were taken captive. His father, Lord Rickard Stark, rode to King's Landing to demand justice, and as his son and the whole court watched, he was burned alive. For Brandon and his men, the Mad King set up a twisted trap, binding nooses around their necks while placing their sword just out of reach.
If you are a true knight, then take your sword and save yourself.
Brandon fought against the noose, struggling, clawing, reaching for the blade. But the more he struggled, the tighter the rope pulled. He choked, he gasped. His eyes bulged, his face turned purple. His limbs twitched. And then he was dead. Strangled by his own efforts to reach the sword that had once made him feel invincible. The Starks had come for justice, and all they found was death. Catelyn learned of his death days later. She did not weep immediately, not at first. She was a Tully, and Tullys were strong. But at night, when she was alone, the tears came silently. Brandon was her future, and now he was nothing but ashen memory. And before she could even grieve him properly, another letter arrived from Winterfell. She was to marry Eddard Stark in his place. Before we get into Cat and Ned's love story, subscribe and hit the bell button. It really helps us create better content. Eddard Stark arrived at Riverrun in the midst of war. Quieter than Brandon, sterner, more controlled. He had none of his brother's fire, but there was something in his gaze, deep, thoughtful, like the frozen lakes of the north. He was a man who had seen death, who had already fought battles he never asked for. He had lost his father, his brother, and yet he stood before her without complaint, without rage, only duty. Their wedding was somber. There was no celebration, no songs, only the weight of war pressing down on them both. Catelyn could not help but compare him to Brandon in those first days. Where Brandon had laughed freely, Eddard was reserved. Where Brandon had been restless, Eddard was careful, measured. Where Brandon had boasted of his skill, Eddard spoke little of himself. At first, she thought him distant, cold. But as time passed, she began to see the depth beneath the silence. Eddard did not speak his affections, but he showed them in quiet ways. One night, when she burned her fingers on a candle, he took her hand gently and examined it.
You should be more careful.
It is nothing.
He met her eyes, serious.
It is something to me.
It was the first time she felt a flicker of something beyond duty. Respect became admiration. Admiration became trust. And trust, over time, became love. She had once thought Brandon was the perfect match, but Eddard was the husband she needed. With him, she felt safe. With him, she felt heard. She gave birth to Robb Stark at Riverrun, surrounded by her family, but without her husband by her side. Ned did not hold her hand. Ned did not see his firstborn son's first breath. Ned did not whisper words of love in her ear, because Ned Stark was at war, fighting for Robert Baratheon, fighting to overthrow the Mad King who had murdered his father and brother. It was a lonely, uncertain time. She cradled Robb alone, whispering to him of a father he had never met. She murmured into the soft tufts of his auburn hair,
You are the heir to Winterfell. You will be strong. You will be a Stark.
And she prayed that his father would return. The war was over. Robert Baratheon had taken the throne. And finally, Ned Stark returned to claim his wife and child. When he saw Robb for the first time, something in him softened.
He has your coloring.
He is a Stark.
He is ours.
Ned did not speak flowery words. He did not boast or posture. But there was a steadiness in him, a loyalty. And in time, Catelyn would come to love him for it. Then, she saw the boy. He was barely a babe, wrapped in a thick cloak, his face round, his tiny hands curling into fists. But Catelyn knew what he was before Ned even spoke.
His name is Jon.
Her stomach tightened.
Whose child is this?
Ned's jaw clenched.
Do not ask me that.
That was all he would ever say. And that was all it took for hatred to take root in her heart. She accepted her duty, had done everything that was asked of her, and yet Ned had still betrayed her. She could never look at Jon without thinking of the nameless woman Ned had laid with while she waited alone. She despised him from the moment she saw him. And then, one night, she wished him dead. She had never spoken the words aloud, but in her heart, she had prayed. The next morning, Jon Snow fell deathly ill. He burned with fever, coughing and gasping for breath. The maester feared he would not live, and Catelyn felt sick with guilt. She stayed by his bedside, whispering prayers to the gods she had once begged to take him away. She whispered over his tiny body.
I take it back. Let him live.
He did. But she could never love him. She tried. Gods, she tried. But every time she looked at him, she saw Ned's betrayal. And so, she ignored him, pushed him aside. And Jon Snow grew up knowing his stepmother would never love him. That day changed everything. It planted a seed of bitterness in Catelyn's heart that never fully left her. She loved her husband. She loved her children. But Jon Snow would always be the shadow that haunted their happiness. And that shadow would stretch far into the future until it led her down a path of war, loss, and blood. 19 years later, at the Red Wedding, Catelyn Stark died with her son's blood on her hands and her own scream still echoing through the hall. The last thing she felt was the cold steel of a Frey's blade slicing open her throat. Then silence. But was this truly the end of Catelyn Stark? In the books, her story doesn't end here. What if the show had given us the true horror of Lady Stoneheart? Stick around, because what comes next is vengeance. Her body was thrown into the river. The Green Fork carried her corpse downstream. Her skin turned pale, bloated with river water. Her red hair tangled with weeds, floating like a ghost's veil. Her eyes, once full of warmth, now stared into nothingness. For 3 days and nights she drifted. And then, hands pulled her from the depths. The Brotherhood without banners had found her. The men of the Brotherhood stared at her lifeless form, uncertain, afraid.
She's been dead for too long.
One of them muttered. Even Thoros of Myr, the Red Priest, did not try to resurrect her.
I cannot. She is too far gone. Rhalla's fire will not answer.
But one man did not accept that answer. Beric Dondarrion. He had already died and risen 6 times, his life a gift of fire and sacrifice. But when he looked at Catelyn Stark, Lady Stark, mother of the king in the north, the woman betrayed and butchered, he knew what had to be done.
She deserves another chance.
The Brotherhood watched in silence as Beric knelt beside her, pressing his hands against her cold skin.
Let it be me. Take my life and give it to her.
And with that, he gave up his last breath. The fire that had kept him alive passed into her. The light flickered. The air grew heavy. And then, Catelyn Stark gasped. Her eyes snapped open, and Lady Stoneheart was born. She sat up slowly, her body moving with the stiffness of a corpse. The Brotherhood stared in horror. Her skin was gray, pulled tight over sharp bones. Her throat was still slit, gaping open, her voice a whisper of ruin. Her fingers were clawed, her nails broken, from where she had torn her own face at the Red Wedding. But her eyes burned with something terrible. Not warmth, not love, not mercy. Only vengeance. She tried to speak, but the wound in her throat had stolen her voice.
Lady Stark, can you hear us?
Thoros asked, his voice trembling. She did not answer. Instead, she turned her hollow gaze toward the men before her.
The phrase.
The words scraped from her ruined throat, barely a sound, more of a rasp, a hiss. The men shifted uncomfortably. One of them tried to explain, tried to say that justice would come in time. But Lady Stoneheart did not believe in time. She believed in blood. The Brotherhood changed that day. They had once been knights fighting for the people. Now, they were executioners. By Lady Stoneheart's command, they hunted down anyone who had sworn allegiance to House Frey, House Lannister, or House Bolton. They found men in villages, on the roads, in the woods. She did not ask them questions. She did not offer them trials. She simply watched as they hung from the trees, one by one, the wind carrying their final gasps into the night. Some begged for mercy. She had none. Some swore they were innocent. She did not care. Some cried for their families. She had lost hers. And so, the Brotherhood dragged their bodies to the river, letting the current swallow them whole, just as the river had swallowed her. Justice, she had once believed, was meant to be fair. But now, vengeance was the only justice left. But can we really blame her? If you lost everything like Catelyn did, would you do the same? Or has she gone too far? Let me know in the comments. Not all traitors were men. One day, the Brotherhood captured a woman in armor, a woman who once swore an oath to Catelyn Stark. Brienne of Tarth. Lady Stoneheart stared at her for a long time, her lifeless gaze searching the face of the woman who had once promised to protect her daughters.
You swore an oath.
Brienne's lips trembled.
I did, I swear it still.
Lady Stoneheart did not believe her. Brienne rode with Jaime Lannister now. Brienne wore the sword of the Kingslayer. Brienne had not saved Sansa, had not saved Arya, had not saved Robb, had not saved Ned.
Traitor.
The Brotherhood threw a noose around Brienne's neck.
Choose. Kill Jaime Lannister, or die.
Brienne struggled. She fought. She pleaded. She swore she was loyal. But Lady Stoneheart was not Catelyn anymore, and there was no mercy left. Brienne gasped for air. And then she screamed a word we never hear. Once there had been a woman named Catelyn Stark. She had been a mother, a wife, a lady of Winterfell. She had believed in justice, honor, and family. But that woman was dead. And what rose in her place was something else entirely. A specter of vengeance, a whisper of the grave, a ghost that would never rest. Lady Stoneheart. Lady Stoneheart was never in the show. Her story was cut from the screen, her revenge left unfinished. But in the books, she still walks the Riverlands. And the question remains, will she play a role in the final war? Will she get her revenge over the Freys, the Lannisters, the Boltons? Will she kill Littlefinger for betraying Ned? Will she find Sansa, Will she find Arya? Will she finally find peace? Or will her rage consume her forever? Don't forget to like if you want part 2. Catelyn Stark was a woman of duty, love, and sacrifice. But in the end, the world gave her nothing in return. Was she right to embrace vengeance as Lady Stoneheart, or should she have found peace? Let's talk in the comments. And if you love deep dives into the true versions of these characters, don't forget to subscribe for more.